People don't want to see that.
Yeah,
shit.
you're good.
Okay. Land use controls and property development. Let's talk a little bit about land use controls. Government encourages private ownership. Why do you think government encourages private ownership of land? Tax it. They tax it. If nobody owns the land, they ain't getting no tax from it. Municipalities develop comprehensive plan to control the growth of the township or borough that it's in. Okay? The goal is planned and orderly growth. If you lived in a housing plan, would you want a gas station right next door to your house? No. Now, some areas don't have zoning, so there are houses beside gas stations. But for, let's say, a township here, they're a pretty controlled township where they have a comprehensive plan. It's like a 20-year plan. And boy, I wish I had a marker here. But let's say this is the township, this whole square here. They may say, okay, this little section right here is going to be retail. Walmarts, Lowe's, Giant Eagle, Snowball's Hair and Tanning Salon. No longer tanning. Specializing in hair only. And then they may say, this area over here in the township is going to be for recreation. Cedar Creek Park. Okay. Then they say, okay, this area here is going to be for single-family homes. And then they may say, this area here is going to be R1 for agricultural or farms. And then so if you want to put a farm over Walmart, they're going to say, no, you can't do it. There's ways around it. We'll talk about it. So they want to control the growth of their municipality. And by doing that, keeps values. It's not like the Wild Wild West. You don't have, like in South Huntington Township, where you have a power, they don't have the comprehensive plan like Ross Traver does, and you can put a power plant right next door to a residential one. I'm sure they have these very comprehensive plan. Who develops it? I just talked 5 minutes about it, guys. You're killing me. Ross Traver Township. The municipality develops it, right? Ross Traver's the one that developed this. Lowe's, Cedar Creek, farms, residentials. So the local municipality has the power to do that. Licensees are aware of local land use and restrictions for development and for some residential communities having restrictions. Some residential communities have restrictions. The community, some communities will have a restriction, your house has to be so big. Does anybody live in a plan of homes where they tell you that the house has to be so big in that plan? Okay, does anybody live in a plan here? Plan. You do? You, Paul, you do. Sweeney plan, right? So
Maybe you don't want people knowing where you live.
You don't care, do you? Sweeney Plan's a big plant. Do you know where Sweeney Plan's at? Only because of Sweeney's Bar and Grill. So some plans have restrictions. Some plans, like I'll just pull one out of the air. Shawnee Point. You ever hear that, Ross River Township? Shawnee Point. You have to have so much. The front of the house has to be brick or stone. The sides of the back could be vinyl or aluminum, but the front has to be brick or stone. And when they put that plan in place and they develop that plan, they put those restrictions in. They also put those restrictions in that the houses had to be a certain size. Ranches had to be a certain size. Story and a half had to be a certain size. 2 stories had to be a certain size. And again, what they're trying to do, Christine, is they're trying to preserve the value of that plan. They're trying to preserve the value. But if they say all the houses have to be, if they're a two-story over 2,000 square feet, then they're going to be all bigger homes, and they'll pull everybody's value up. So as a licensee, Seneca, you have to be aware that there may be, for developments, there may be restrictions, and some residential communities, there may be restrictions. Some of you guys may get into land development, okay? We were at one time, my company had 3 new construction plans in Ross River Township, where we were working with developers, we were working with builders, we were building new homes, we were selling those homes. Man, that's a great part of the business to be involved in if you can get involved in that. So you have to be aware. The state wants you to be aware to pass the test. Police power. Through enabling acts, provides authority to create regulation to protect public health, safety, and welfare. And when they put this, Ross River puts this comprehensive plan, Lauren, in place, they're doing this to protect the public's health and welfare of Ross River Township. Okay? And they do that through police power. And the way they have Ross River Township has that police power is through the state government gives them through enabling acts. Okay? I would let you go one. Does anybody need one? I have it for sale. $25. Huh?
I need one, Tom.
You want the $25 one?
Is there
A free one.
$30 one?
There's a free one.
Thanks. I know.
You can store it.
Sorry.
2 left. Anybody else need one?
Thank you.
Anybody else need one?
I won't be able to catch it. Thank you.
Okay. Will we highlight it again? What was it? Police power is created through enabling acts, providing authority to create regulations to protect public health. States delegate power to the counties. Counties delegate to the local municipalities. See, states in the United States, and you guys better wear jackets Thursday. It's way too warm here. In the United States, don't the states have certain authority? Each individual states. You can go to California and buy weed, can't you? Right? You can't go to Pennsylvania and buy weed unless you have medical, right? For recreational use. When COVID came, some states were wide open. Florida, wide open, man. They're wide open. Pennsylvania, they restrict it. So the federal government has federal laws, and sometimes the state laws will trump them. So even though it's a federal offense to smoke weed, California's saying, forget it, feds. We're going to say our people can do it. So the states are the ones with the power. And the reason they did that was when they started the first 13 colonies, they came over, they started their 13 colonies from England, right? The English came over here and settled those 13 colonies. And didn't they have like the Tea Party and the Rebellion? And John, what's his name, drove through Revere with a horse saying the British are coming, right? Right? Paul Revere. So when they started those first 13 colonies, they say, hey, no more of that shit where we're letting one government body cover all of them. They all had different laws. And they still do to today. So the states have a lot of power. Even though the federal government's up here, the states have a lot of power. And local municipalities, through enabling acts, where the state delegates powers to counties, townships, and local municipalities, may make ordinances that are consistent with general laws. Okay, through enabling acts. use to control pollution, noise, air, water, and density. Does anybody know what density is when we're talking about real estate? Ooh, there's a term, density zoning. Who knows it? If you don't know it, where are you going to go? Real quick, back to the book. Just open it. Now you got to get used to that right here. Look at this action right here. See? Right here. Just throw over the D. If I did it before you guys do, you're in trouble. I found it. So on page 721. You know why? Because I need the back of the book. I need the back of the book. I want you to need the back of the book. What is density zoning?
Ordinance that restricts the average maximum number of houses per acre to be built within a particular area, generally a subdivision.
Right. So they want the lots to be a certain size because they don't want the houses on top of each other. You ever watch those real estate shows, Selling LA, Josh Altman? You anybody watch them guys? I love those guys. Some of those houses out in California, man, they're like right on top. They're $1 million houses, they're right on top of each other. So sometimes municipalities create density zoning and say, okay, for every acre, Ross Draver, it's for every acre, there can be 4 houses. 4 houses per acre on the new development. Now, existing stuff that was already built before the comprehensive plans came in play, but if you want to build a new development like Schuster's building over by the park, those lots have to be, can't put more than 1 house on a quarter lot. So let's see if my, Andrew, I may need some help here too. Let's see if this video will work. Okay. I need a minute, guys.
What did it say?
I gotta get hooked up to the Wi-Fi here.
Oh.
Can you drive? Yeah. While she's driving, let's look at a couple other we know what the comprehensive plan is, right? What is the comprehensive plan? Who creates the comprehensive plan? Local municipality. That will be the test question, because it'll be the local municipality, because local municipality can be a borough if it's a city. Let me know when you're hooked up, then try it.
All right.
Yeah, but we'll have to go to slideshow from the current slide up on top. Let's see if we can get this video to work. Now, I tested this at home. We haven't touched this computer for 2 years. It's running slower and slow. I probably need Bob Casey to clean it up.
Have the software update maybe?
Probably.
There's a lot of stuff on.
Why? So when must not be on the internet then? Escape out of that. While she's playing with that, let's go over some more key terms. Covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Where would they come into play at? Covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I talked about these at Shawnee Point, didn't I? What did I say at Shawnee Point? The front of all the houses had to be what, Lauren? Brick. So those would be in the covenants and conditions and restrictions in that particular subdivision. Now, if you drive out of Shawnee Point and go up by the high school on Fell Church Road, those homes don't fall under those restrictions, but they were put in by that developer. And as a matter of fact, this is a plat for Shawnee Point. You get me working there, Andrew. For some reason, I don't think we're on the internet.
It's on. You're on. It's just won't open.
You try closing up and going back in.
This was the
Try loading.
okay. This was the plat for Shawnee Point. A plat is where the developer carved it all out. So this was all one big piece of property. The developer made a plat. Plat's just a drawing, carving it all out. Then they take it to the local municipality for their approval, and then they have a subdivision seal on the bottom of it. So a plat is just a map where they first do the development, and then they take it and run it through the township and the county for their approvals. Then it's a subdivision, recorded subdivision in the courthouse. Okay, so when they did this, that's when they put the restrictions in. And every deed in this plan will reference those conditions. And they'll be recorded in the courthouse. And you can pull them up. We're not working, huh?
Hey, and that ours popped up. If this is a public network, you probably get the information.
You know what? They shouldn't work off of this. I just think we're having technical difficulty today.
Do you usually log into the guest?
Yes,
Okay.
that's what he said.
That's what it's on.
Yep.
You can't tether from different devices.
With that,
Tethers from something is different.
and
Hotspot.
it should, I want to be able to, I have like tons of these videos for you guys because they explain it better than me. I just don't know why it's not open. There's nothing's open except a couple PowerPoints, right? Okay. There it goes.
Just taking some
Jesus
time.
criminy out loud. Do we need to get another computer up here?
Or have Casey clean it.
Can you text him and ask him if I drop it off at the office tonight? Can he clean it up for me and get it
By
back?
Thursday.
I need it for Thursday.
Yeah, Thursday.
Thursday's class. I mean, it's really running slow. Okay, so now we got to get the sound to work.
You said drop it off at his house, right?
No, tell him to come down to the
Come get
office.
But it is important if you're a real city fan. So let's go over it. When people talk about government powers, they're talking about four things. To remember these four items, think of the name Pete. P is for police power, E is for eminent domain, T is for taxation, and E is for SG. Pete. That's the name you got to remember. An individual would not have any of these rights. Let's start with the first one, police power. This has nothing to do with the men in blue. Police power is the state's inherent right to regulate an individual's conduct or property to protect the health, safety, welfare, and morals of the community. That does come up a lot in the exams. You don't want to remember that. Unlike the exercise of eminent domain, no compensation need be paid regarding police power. Common examples of police power are zoning, building codes, and rent control. I've made a section about zoning if you want to learn more about that subject. Next, we got eminent domain. Eminent domain refers to the power possessed by the state to appropriate property for public use. In some jurisdictions, the state delegates eminent domain power to certain public and private companies. Typically, we're talking about utilities. So they can bring eminent domain actions to run telephone, power.
So, police power doesn't have anything to do with the men in blue, right? What's it have to do with? The states inherit the local municipalities' rights through police powers to control an area for the health, safety, and public welfare of a community, right? Right? And then eminent domain. Eminent domain is where the state can come in and take your property. Okay, so where my real estate office is, they put it, if you come off 51, if you're coming from Bill's Golf Land, they put a new bridge in. They needed more room to put the new bridge in. So they came and took a piece of property off of me. They took a piece of property off me permanently, and then they leased the piece. They leased the piece for 3 years.
So can they just take?
They just
the
take
property?
it. They just take it.
Oh,
They have to pay you.
I was gonna say, do you get paid for it?
Yeah, but I wasn't happy with the payment.
Right, okay.
And that phone call that I got was from my attorney, because you have a right, if they take your property through eminent domain, to take them to court and file for just compensation. They gave me like $6,000. I said, no way, Jose. So I hired an attorney. He just called me because we're still fighting the case. It's been like 4 years. And we're saying it was worth more than that. It was worth more. So if they want to come and put power lines through your property, they can take your property. If they want to put a water line in front, a sewer line in front, and they need to run through your property, they can take your property. Now they have to pay you just compensation, but eminent domain is the state's right to take the property, some individual property or use of the public.
I was under the impression that they had to give you the value amount of what that property was worth, and you could take it to court and fight them.
Well, when PennDOT made me an offer, they made me an offer of $6,000. And that was to rent my lower parking lot for 3 years and to take a small parcel. I said $6,000 is not enough. So they gave me the check for $6,000. They said, here's the check, Tom. Take it. It's yours. And if you're not happy, take us to court. And that's what I'm in the middle of right now, almost in the end of it. Because I'm arguing that the property was worth more than $6,000. Okay. So, eminent domain, they could take it for public use.
Water or gas lines. The owner of any appropriated land is entitled to reasonable compensation, usually defined as the fair market value of the property. Check out my section on eminent domain to learn more about how that works. Next, we got taxation. Pretty simple. A charge on real estate used to pay for the services provided by the government. Lastly, there's escheat. Escheat occurs when property reverts to the state when an individual dies without a will, without heirs, and nobody can reasonably claim it. Escheat ensures that the property always has ownership. Escheat is usually done on a revocable basis, which means that ownership of the state or property will revert to a rightful heir should somebody appear. Well, that's it for government power. If you don't remember any of this, just at least remember this. The 4 government powers are police power, eminent domain, taxation, and escheat.
You got to remember those. Pete. I don't know a Pete. Anybody know a Pete? Anybody know Pete? Is there a famous Pete? Who?
In the Bible, Peter.
Peter. Okay, there you go. So Pete for short in the Bible would be the 4 government powers. Police power. Doesn't have anything to do with the men in blue. Right, Samantha? What's it have to do with? It gives the local municipalities the right from the state to control. Right. The domain. What's in the domain have to do? Taking property for personal property that somebody owns for the public use, right? Taxation. And then escheat. Now, why does the government, the government wants people to own property. Okay? The government wants people to own property so they can tax it. So if somebody dies and they don't have a will and they don't have any heirs, the government wants to step in and give that property to somebody or sell that property to somebody. So then that property can start generating money. Okay? So prepagent.com. I want everybody to write that down. He's my man. You can go on YouTube on your phone and go to prepagent.com or Prep Agent. Somebody go on YouTube on your phone. Anybody, who's a YouTuber? Lisa? How you doing?
It's actually falling.
And put Prep Agent in under YouTube. And he'll have all kinds of good videos that explain things in layman terms. And I use him a lot, okay? I use him a lot in my videos that I play at my class. And you know what? So just a little tidbit. TK just in time, please.
And to remember that, you've got to remember the name Pete. More great information to get past the real estate exam. Remember, go to prepagent.com.
Little commercial.
So I've got my essay written, and I've been working on it for about a week. So now I'm going to show you how I use grammar.
Okay. We're on Unit 2. Anybody on page? What page? 27. Yeah, we got 27 pages already today. I didn't even want to come today. It was snowy and cold. So privately owned real estate is regulated through the following: land use planning, zoning ordinance, subdivision regulations, building codes, and environmental protection legislation. So we're going to stop right there and take a quick 5-minute break because it's been an hour. Remember, I don't like to learn more than an hour and go to it. So we're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we're going to jump back in.
I need
Well, here's mine.
police, or like Pete is in unit, what did I say, 5?
Yeah, it's
For us.
13 doesn't follow it, so
That's why, like,
Here,
you're like,
take
what's
mine.
going on? I just want to look at them.
Yeah. Well,
I'm not gonna keep it.
oh, I didn't want to hear you touch my
He's
book.
like, okay. I mean, it's snag that, okay, so. Is it actually? That was government. How nicely. No, it's the same. Government powers, that's what we're just talking about, right? It's on page 70. It must have just jumped ahead a little bit. Page 70 is chapter 5. So yeah, it's the same. So you just saw. It was, yeah, it just jumped, yeah, it just jumped around. Okay.
Boy, was police power in the
Yeah, it's
student,
just,
student? Was that?
it's in chapter 5.
Yeah, but we're only in chapter 2.
I know.
That's
It
what
was,
we're saying.
yeah.
Okay,
It
so,
must jump around a little bit.
okay, so let me ask you a question. In Unit 2, under the 14th edition, police powers were there.
No. Oh, yeah. it
But in
does
your
say.
edition, it wasn't.
No, there's
Um,
police power in. the
yeah.
playground.
Yeah,
We're saying like.
but the whole,
the
like,
Pete.
It's,
yeah,
they're
the whole
different.
heat thing, the government controls is in unit 5, like, everything.
But how about in the new book?
Yeah,
The new book, it was in Unit 2? I want to make sure I'm on the right track here.
no, they're, but they're in the same units.
Okay.
Yeah, it just says police power specifically is the only one that's in unit 2.
Yeah.
But the actual whole government controls the rest of it is in chapter 5. Like the eminent, well, I don't know. If you look in the back of the book in the glossary, under government controls,
Well, this is what we have to do.
it's chapter 5.
I would say, if you're trying to save $50, save the $50, use the old book. You jump
Yeah.
around a little bit. I don't think the units are different until we get to unit 5 or 6. I can't remember,
Okay.
but you'll be close enough.
Okay.
If you want the 14th edition, I have them here. Lex, same with you.
Well, we're saying the P is nobody even knows what we're talking about. Like, we didn't learn how much.
Right.
It wasn't in unit 2?
The only thing that's in unit 2 is, that's it.
Well, I think that's
Right.
why.
Am I explaining that right?
Like Pete, all that information.
Yeah. Well,
We'll go a little jump start.
okay, don't worry about it.
Well,
Yeah.
okay.
Are you
Well,
gonna
it
be
even
okay, Paul?
says,
That should be all right.
Alright.
it even says, like, when it says the definition of police power, it does say see unit 5.
It does.
Yeah, so,
Well, you know, they do a new book because they don't want people to use the old book. They want you to spend the $50.
yeah.
So should I move it? Maybe I'll move that. Unit 5. I'll make a note of that.
Well, no, because it's still under use control.
Okay, Lex says whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Okay.
Now we know a little bit about unit 5.
Now you know what police power is.
Yeah.
And you know what Pete is, right?
Well,
What's Pete stand for? Sarah, give me the P.
Police power.
Give me the E, Samantha.
Eminent domain.
Give me the T, Lexi.
If not with the T, I don't remember. Taxation. or something?
Taxation.
You got it.
Taxation. And then what is the E for at the end? That's G. If you die without a will, the government has the right to take the property and give it to somebody else. Okay. That's G.
Spell that?
That's G.
ESCH.
And that's probably all in unit 5 is what the girls are saying. So maybe I need to take that video and move it to unit 5.
Sure.
Move the police power video to unit 5. Is that what, hey, that's what you're saying to do. That's what we're going to do. Perfect. You know what, Vonnie? You don't even know how helpful that is because I missed that. And I like to try to follow the book as closely as I can.
Yeah.
You know, do you want to borrow my book
Uh-uh.
for right now? Because I'm not really using it.
I'm good.
I'm not really using it. So privately owned real estate is regulated through the following: land use planning, zoning ordinance, subdivision regulations, building codes, and environmental protection legislation. We talked about the comprehensive plan, right? It's developed locally by counties and townships, and it balances social, economic needs against environmental and concerns. It provides goals and objectives for future development, including strategies and timing. Okay, so in Pennsylvania has the municipal planning code. So that would be a Pennsylvania code for land use, housing needs, movement of people, highways and goods, community facilities and utilities, and energy conservation. The comprehensive plan or master plan is developed locally. We talked about that. Zoning. Zoning is a regulatory tool that helps communities regulate and control growth. Zoning ordinances affect the permitted use of the land. Remember we said if this was Ross Draper Township, this corner right here is zoned for business, right? Walmart, Lowe's. This over here is zoned for parks and recreation. This over here was zoned for single-family homes. This over here was zoned for agricultural. So the township can lay that zoning out and say, okay, that's what we're going to allow here, because they want orderly growth. And they do that through the comprehensive plan. They can control lot sizes, types of structures, setbacks. Does anybody know what a setback is? Lise,
Away from the road.
how far back away from the road your house can be? My son Paul just bought a house a year ago in South Park. I said, Paul, I think you should get a survey. He said, nah, I don't think I need it. So for a closing gift, I bought him a survey before we closed. And we found out that if this is 25 feet from the road, the corner of the house was going over that setback. So now Paul had to make a decision. Do you want to buy the house or not? That's why he shows you the survey. Okay, so if this was the setback right here, just that corner. So we called the local municipality, and I had Paul talk to the guy in the zoning. He said, don't worry about it. That happens all the time in this township. We're not going to come make you move the house. Okay, and that's what a setback would be. There's also sidelines that say how close you can build to the side of the property. Zoning codes must be flexible. So they have to be flexible to meet the ever-changing demands of the community. Can you pass these out, everybody? Pass this one out first, then pass this one out. An example is planned unit development, a PUD, where land is set aside for mixed-use purposes. Residential, commercial, and public areas may be modified for PUDs. Did anybody ever go down to the Lowe's Theater in Homestead, down the waterfront?
Oh, sorry.
That is a PUD. Don't they have recreation? They have the bike trail there. Don't they have apartments? And they have also commercial, all tied in there. So that was planned that way. And people like that because they can go right out of their apartment, go get some, a Starbucks right there's a Starbucks, or they go right down to the bike trail, go down to the point, or even from Ross Draper. Okay, so remember that a PUD is where there's mixed uses, and when you remember PUD, you're going to remember what? The Homestead waterfront.
Wait, I wasn't listening. You said.
What's that, honey?
I was listening. You said there's houses right there, and then there's.
Yeah, there's apartments. If you go into like the Lowe's Theater, as you're pulling in there, on the left-hand side, there's like a Lowe's and Dick's Sporting Good, and there's a place where you go watch bars and shit. And then on the right there is there's houses, there's apartments. Large cities are changing zoning to allow factories to be converted to residential properties. So in some large cities where they have factories downtown, they're converting those factories into apartments. Zoning. But remember we said it has to be flexible. Zoning codes must be flexible to meet the ever-changing demands of the community. So that one paper Miss Andrea just passed out to you guys on the zoning article. So this was something I spotted in the newspaper. And Ross River Township clears the way for controlling growth in this article. And their zoning board unanimously approved the rezoning from agricultural to residential of a 60-acre parcel on Ross River Road, owned by Kevin Dickey. And that's the Miranda plan right down here on 201, right before you get to Sweeney's Restaurant, where those new houses are going up. So that property was owned agricultural. The Sweeney's owned that property. Mr. Dickey went to the township and said, could you change that zoning from agricultural to residential so that we can build houses on it? And they approved it. So who has the right to change the zoning? Local municipalities. And they need to be able to be flexible and change them if it is in best interest of the community, okay? Local zoning laws that implement comprehensive plans and regulators often create buffer zones. So a buffer zone would be if they're going to change the zoning and this was agricultural to residential, they probably have to put a buffer zone in between the two. A buffer zone would be more realistic if you had something that was zoned residential or agricultural and they allowed you to change the zoning to commercial. They may want you to put a buffer zone between that commercial property and the residential homes. It could be trees, an area is like a buffer zone, so the commercial's not right up against the residential.
Like transition property.
Excuse me?
Like a transition property.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Bulk zoning is used to control the density to avoid overcrowding. Remember, we said density refers to what? What's density refer to? To what?
How many houses could be?
How many houses could be in a, Vaughn, you're on it. Aesthetic zoning for new buildings. Anybody ever go to Georgetown, Delaware? Anybody ever go to Rehoboth, Ocean City? You ever notice that Georgetown has a lot of those old houses? So in Georgetown, if you rip a house down, it has to fit a certain architectural style, most likely a Victorian or colonial style, to match the rest of the neighborhood. So they don't want you, if all the houses are Victorian, does everybody know what a Victorian style house is? They don't want you to rip that down and put up a contemporary, because it would take away from the property values of the rest of the people. So they could even control the type of house. Incentive zoning to ensure that certain uses are incorporated into developments. Example, street floor office buildings to house retail establishments. You see a lot of this in downtown Pittsburgh. Like we used to go down there and on Liberty. And on the first floor, they got restaurants and all kind of stuff. And then on the second floor up, apartments. See, that's all controlled by zoning. All controlled by zoning. Constitutional issues. and zoning ordinances. And that's why you have to be able to go to appeal it. Like, this land would be better used to build houses on it than farmland. Now, if that was the last farm left in Ross Draver, they'd probably said no. But the township made a decision that there's enough farmland still in Ross Draver that they can carve that piece out and build houses on. Land use legislation may not be destructive, unreasonable. Has to be clear and specific, non-discriminatory. Must promote public health, safety, and the general welfare. And it must apply to all property in a similar manner. Taking. Okay, we're getting to eminent domain and condemnation. So eminent domain is the state's right to take your property. Is that what it says in the back of the book? Garrett, can I have you look in there? I haven't asked called on you. What's it say for eminent domain? In the back of the book.
Right of government for the municipal public body for public use through the legal process called condemnation.
Okay, so eminent domain is the state's right, or local municipality's right, to take property for public use. Which condemnation say in the back of the book? While you look that up, I'm going to call my attorney, see if he can explain it. And if sometimes you hear from somebody else.
Our regular business hours are Monday through Friday.
Will you set the example of your property?
Yeah, condemnation. Hi, Les. Hey, Les, I got you on speakerphone, and I'm teaching a class for pre-licensing real estate. And so don't say anything that pertaining to our case that's personal. And we're talking about eminent domain and condemnation. And I said, what coincidence? Les Mallocker, attorney Les Mallocker, just called me about a case that we're working on. So eminent domain is the state's right to take your property, correct?
State or local government or authority.
And condemnation is the process they use.
Right, that is, yeah, they use the term interchangeably. But what they get the right under the eminent domain law, and then what they file is a declaration of taking, which people say interchangeably in condemnation action.
So it's a little bit confusing, and that's why we got a pro like you. And Les is the best.
They're basically the same thing.
Okay. And then if a state or municipality takes your property, you have no say in it, correct?
Well, you may. There are 4 exceptions under the eminent domain code that you could file what's called the preliminary. But those are rare.
Okay.
Those are rare.
And then if you're not happy with the compensation, you can take them to court and fight for more money.
Well, what happens is before they file the declaration of taking, they make a payment to you of estimated just compensation, okay?
Okay.
And that's what they say there, and your damages are. You can accept that, okay? But they still have to file the eminent domain action. You just don't sign any document of
And then if you're not happy with the amount, you can take it to court to file for just compensation.
Right, they have to follow condemnation action.
Right.
And then that's when you hire an attorney and you get an appraiser to appraise your property.
Okay, well, listen, when I get out on lunch break, I'll call you back.
Okay, you want me to come down and give it 10 hours of time, I will.
Oh, I may have to do that. I appreciate that. Maybe 20, how much time would you need for that?
Depending on 5 questions, anywhere from a half hour to an hour.
Okay. If I have extra time at this class, maybe me and you'll coordinate something. If not, the next class we'll schedule it in. I love that kind of stuff. Thanks, Les.
Call me back when you have the chance.
I will. Thank you. Bye. Okay. Down zoning. That condemnation stuff's a little bit confusing, ain't it?
Process of them.
Eminent domain is the state's right to take your property.
And the process of doing that is-
Condemnation will be used. That's the process.
Yeah.
So, down zoning, the government changes the zoning, for conversion for recreational purposes. Down zoning. So, Pitt has a campus up there. And they had a park. And they had a parking lot. There was a guy that had a parking lot there. And they came in and said, "Mister, we're gonna change the zoning from commercial where you can have a parking lot to recreational, and we're gonna make a park there." That would be down zoning. Down zoning, because commercial, they took it from commercial down to recreation. And they have a right to do that. An inverse condemnation is the action brought by the property owner seeking just compensation for the land that was taken.
Is that what you were doing?
Yeah, I'm still in the process. That's why they called me. So I've been fighting with the state for like 3 years now about this. Because I felt that they used more space. Remember, Andrea? So if this was my parking lot, I have about 1.5 acres there. They only leased a small corner right here for 3 years. And they took a piece right here for the bridge. But then they would bring these big trucks in, and they were driving these big trucks all through my lot.
Yep.
So I'd have my administrative staff run outside every time a big cement truck came through the lot and take a picture.
Yeah.
And I was arguing with them that their compensation wasn't fair because they only leased this spot, but they used the whole lot. See what I'm saying? And inverse condemnation was the action that we brought against them, seeking just compensation. So, zoning permit. The low court. Okay, that was the hand up. That was Ross Draver Township's zoning board that changed the zoning from agricultural to residential for Mr. Dickey. Okay. You could also ask for a non-conforming use. So, how far wash is that? Okay. Right across the street, there's a great building. Probably never recognized it, but it sits right up against the railroad tracks. Okay. So we bought that building and we wanted to move our office into Ross Draver. It was a single family home. And we went to the Ross Draver Township zoning and asked for a non-conforming use to change it from a single family home to a commercial. And I put my real estate office in. They granted it. They looked at the situation. They said, "Tom, you know what? You're right. That the better use for that property, because it's all commercial around there, would be commercial. Not." And you could also get a conditional use for a variance. In West Newton, when I had an office in West Newton, I asked for a variance to vary from the zoning to let me put, again, another office I was putting in. It was triplex building, residential, and I asked for a variance to change it so that I could not just let me have a variance so that I could run a real estate office out of that residential zoning. They can give you a variance. They can give you a variance. In Pennsylvania, the seller disclosure statement will state what kind of zoning it is. Okay, so if Lisa's selling her house, she'll have to put on a seller disclosure what kind of zoning it is. And it applies to certain types of property, mostly commercial. So if you're selling a residential house, typically you don't have to put anything in. But if it's other than residential, you'd have to put commercial in. So let's see if we can get, I got a couple videos here. Let's see if we can get the videos work any better, Andrea. We have to do a Facebook post today too.
Okay.
And you know what else do? You make a note. Just go on YouTube, find out what the fee is on watch these ads.
Okay.
Try to save a couple bucks. So you gotta pay attention to the ad first.
You booked a sunny Verbo ski chalet with endless views of snow-covered peaks.
Pass your real estate exam with prepagent.com. Remember, keep it concise and keep it simple.
Write that down, prepagent.com. He's my go-to guy, man. YouTube, you can go on his website, you can buy stuff from him, or you can get a lot, you can go to YouTube and just look at his videos. You know, if you're looking at his video, if you look at his video and say, oh, I don't really understand what that means. He's good at explaining this stuff.
Let's talk about zoning. Zoning is the regulation of private land use and development by the local government. There are no federal zoning laws. Zoning is a central part of the master plan. The master plan is a comprehensive plan to guide the long-term physical development of a particular area. Let's be clear here. Zoning increases the marketability of a property. For example, would you want to live next to a gas station? Guess what? A gas station would not need to be near you either. So, luckily for both of you, there is zoning. Zoning is a police power. Now, when you think of police power, do not think of the men in blue. The police power is that power that is held by the state to legislate for the purpose of preserving the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare. Zoning for land use is generally divided into residential, commercial, agricultural, industrial, and special purpose properties. When we're talking about special purpose properties, we're talking about properties that are benefits to the public, such as schools, hospitals, and police stations. Each of these land uses are subdivided into classifications. For example, a multifamily residential unit would be zoned as R3, the R being for residential. Zoning control a number of things, such as heights of buildings, setback lines, density, floor area ratios, buffers, buffer zones, and variances. Let's go over some of those things in more detail. A setback is a sidewalk to the structure that was built. It can also be from the center of the road. Check with your local zoning to see where the setback line is for you. Density is usually associated with subdivisions, restricting the number of houses per acre that may be built within that subdivision. A floor area ratio is the ratio of square footage in the land area. The floor area ratio can be used in zoning to limit the amount of construction in a certain area. A buffer is two lots, such as a fence, a wall, or even a row of trees. A buffer zone is a space of land between two districts, such as a park, playground, or a highway. Down zoning is a change in the zoning to permit less intensive developments that are currently permitted. A zone going from commercial to residential is an example of down zoning. A variance is an example.
Remember, we said it pit from commercial to recreational, down zoning. Okay.
Exception that is granted from the zoning rules. A A variance is granted when the situation is exceptional, and if granting that variance will not affect the rest of the community. Key thing to remember is a variance is an exception to the rule. An example would be a house built on a shaped lot. If the odd shape of the lot makes it difficult to comply with the setback line set by the zoning standard, a variance could be requested. Variances are granted lot by lot, meaning they are all evaluated on an individual basis. For more great information,
Let me go back to that variance thing. Is we bought a lot, a pound of shit in a 5-pound bucket. So there were sidelines, was too close to the sideline. So we went to the neighbor and we said, hey, we'd like to get a variance. He said, I'm going to fight you tooth and nail. Build a house on that lot. So we happened to, on a Sunday, go right by the house we live in now, and it was held open. And we bought the house and we sold the lot because we couldn't get the variance. Because we thought even if we could take him to the zoning board and have a hearing and fight it, do you want that kind of relationship with your neighbor? No. So we ended up selling the lot. Who do you think we sold the lot to?
The neighbor.
The neighbor. He bought it. My wife was so pissed off she wouldn't even go to the closing. She wouldn't go to the closing because she always went. She watched Knox Landing as a little girl, and apparently Knox Landing was on the cul-de-sac. So doesn't she have a fantasy about cul-de-sacs? So she wouldn't even go to the closing. But we couldn't get the variance because we were too close to that sideline. We could have, but we would have to go to court, and it had been a big fight with the neighbor, and the guy would have been a bad neighbor. We weren't looking for that.
Granted lot by lot, meaning they are all evaluated on an individual basis. For more great information to get past the real estate exam, remember, go to prepagent.com.
I like it.
Is variance a law?
No,
This is your living room.
variance is something you can get from the local municipality to change change something. Like, for example, in the case on the house we were going to build, Lex, you had to be 10 feet from the sideline. Well, the house we designed was only, when you put it on a lot, would have only been 8 feet from it. So we would have went to Royal River Township and said, can I have a variance for that? Now, when you go to the township and ask for a variance, they send a letter out to all the neighbors. And the neighbors will come to the hearing and voice their complaints. So we thought it just wasn't worth it to fight with the neighbor about it. See what I have here. Here's another.
Hey, Tom,
Yes, sir.
I had that similar situation. I had a garage that was being built, and my neighbor's own property had a driveway. It was kind of like a shared driveway, and I had to file for a variance. And they approved it, but they had to send letters to every neighbor. And then she was older, so her memory with the discussion we had, then she had 4 other parties that were involved in that decision. One was going against it, one was
So you had to go to the local zoning
correct.
board. What municipality was it?
That was Washington Township.
In Washington Township. You had to ask for a variance.
Correct.
And then they sent a letter out to all the neighbors.
Right.
Variances are given on case by case, lot by lot
Right.
situations. And they all had a right to come to the hearing and bitch.
Right.
And then the zoning hearing board makes their decision.
Yeah, even though I own the property, okay, I had to still get permission to move that pad. I had to add on extra concrete to get that garage to fit.
Yeah,
And use some of that property that belonged to me to get.
but it was within what they called the sideline.
Correct.
But they said you couldn't build so many feet from the sideline, just
Right.
like that picture was.
Right.
Now, here's something where the construction began, on the $780 million South Langston Township power plant, where they had to get permission to be able to put that in. And people went to the hearings and bitched, and they still allow them to do it. That's how local municipalities can kind of control things. So zoning ordinances, local municipal laws that implement comprehensive plans. We went through that. Building codes and certificate of occupancy. See, it's getting to be old right now, huh? We've been at this since 9 o'clock, Ellen. Are you feeling a little bit like I'm going like this, blah, 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 blah?
Mine's starting to go cross.
Okay, everybody stand up. Stand up.
Wait, I have a question first.
Oh, okay.
This variance, my head's just gone blank. What's a good definition for it? Because the way that you read it, you're like, I don't even know half these freaking words in this definition.
Okay. What's the definition say?
I need a good definition to like, all right, I know what these words are, I know how it's saying.
It's a lot by lot, it's a decision the township makes, lot by lot, that you can go against a regulation that they have. So in Russ's situation, the regulation was that any buildings couldn't be within 10 feet of the sideline.
Okay, just say that definition again. What'd you just say? You remember?
All I got was municipality can go lot by lot.
The municipality can make a decision to change the requirements lot by lot.
Like zoning requirements?
Well, in that case, it was not zoning, it was because they were trying to encroach on the sideline. So what does the definition say? Okay, you get everybody standing first. Let's stand. Everybody stand. I don't know about you guys. Okay, let's do a little stretching. Hands up like this. Okay, wiggle your fingers. Stretch it to the left. A little teacup to the left. A little teacup. Oh, Lauren, you've done this before, haven't you? No, you sure look like you have. Okay, right leg out. Ain't that the hokey pokey? Wiggle it around a little bit. Left leg out. Just so stretch it out a little bit. Okay. We'll work on that variance lunchtime, me and you.
Oh,
Yeah, I don't really understand it either, so.
Okay, let's go.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to the definition in the back. Go to the glossary.
I already wrote the definition down. I don't understand. I wrote down the exceptions.
Variance is permission obtained from the zoning authority. Now, who's the zoning authority? Ross River Township. It would be Ross River zoning. To build a structure or conduct a use that is expressly prohibited. So Ray wanted to build a garage that would, if the sidelines on his lot were 10 foot, meaning you can't build no closer than 10 foot to the sidelines, he wanted to build 8 foot. So that was expressly prohibited by the current zoning law, and an exception for the zoning ordinance was granted. So they told you, the zoning law states, Ray, you only can build up to 10 foot from the property line. You want to build 8 foot.
Right.
So we're going to have a hearing to see if we'll give you an exception. And that's what they do. They had a hearing and they gave Ray an exception and they said, go ahead, Ray, build your garage. Did they tell you go ahead and build your garage?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So it's basically permission to break the rule.
Yeah, there you go.
Correct.
There you go. Now you understand.
Now we got it.
Just like when you were 19, had that fake ID thing going on. Okay. Building codes and certificate of occupancy. They're construction standards determined by most municipalities. Building permits. So most municipalities have some type of building code or a certificate of occupancy. Meaning, Sarah, do you have any rentals?
No.
Meaning before, if you buy a house in Menneson, you have to go to Borough of Menneson and you have to get a certificate of occupancy. And they come out and look at the house to see if it meets their building codes. Okay, so that's a building. They're very popular. Menneson has them. Monongahela has them. Ross Draver doesn't for some reason. And before you transfer a property, you have to have the zoning officer come out and look at the house. What are they looking for in most cases? Ground fault breakers in the kitchens and bathrooms. Everybody know what ground fault breakers are? Handrails on the steps. Maybe no flaking paint. It could be lead-based paint. Maybe make sure the roof is okay. So a lot of areas you have to get a certificate of occupancy. In Charleroi, if you rent a place out, you have to get a certificate of occupancy also. Okay? So building permits do not correct violations or deed restrictions. But if you wanted to build a house in Ross Draver Township, you would have to get, even if you owned the lot, you'd have to get your plans and go to the township and say, these are my plans, I would like a building permit. And then the township looks at your plans, make sure that you're in compliance with everything, and then they give you a permit to build your house. If you start building the house without a permit, they can come shut it down. Okay? And Pennsylvania has a construction code, or local in nature, and each municipality and city exercises its regulatory right to adopt codes. So Menneson's could be different than Ross Draver's. Ross Draver's could be different than Bell Vernon. Bell Vernon could be different than Monongahela. Each municipality has the right to set their own building codes. This is kind of dry stuff, huh? Is it, Paul? Only 1,100 out of 2,500 municipalities have any kind of construction. So they don't all have it. They don't all have it. Regulation of land development. We're almost done. We got 7 more. We got 7 more, and then we'll break for lunch. So we got through 2 units today, which we're doing really good. And if we can get through 3 units today, meaning, well, in the afternoons, it's really hard because you've been here all day. So I don't know. I may have a little bit of fun in the afternoon with you guys. Just try to spice it up a little bit. But let's get through these 7 slides. We'll break for lunch. We'll come back, and we'll go into unit 3. So regulation of land development. You have a subdivision. So let's say you owned all this land, this piece of land. We'll say this is Shawnee Point. Okay. So you own this land, it's raw land, Lex. Farmland. Rathways, out on Rathway Road. They have farmland out there, right? Let's say Rathway wants to develop it and build houses. What's the process? You just can't start building houses and put roads in. Can he, Ellen? No. First thing he has to do is go through a subdivision. That would be where a subdivider, that could be a guy, lays the lots out. So this is the way it looked, blank canvas, all Rathway Road, all raw land. Then Rathway hires a subdivider, and he draws it all out. Usually it's an engineer, and he puts in roads and lots on paper. And then they call this a plat. So the subdivider lays this all out on paper, and he meets with Rathway and says, what do you think, Rathway? How's that look? We can get all these lots on it. Now Rathway's seeing dollar signs, right? He wasn't getting nothing, but cows were like grazing on it. He could sell all these lots. So he does the plat. This is what this is, a plat. And then he hires after it's approved from the township, then he hires a developer to come in and put the roads in. That's what the developer's role is. See, there's all kind of different parties tied in to making one of these developments roll. So Kevin Dickey was a developer in Maryland Woods. He hired a subdivider to lay it out on paper. Then he went and got it approved through the township. And then it was a approved subdivision recorded in the courthouse. It would look like this, but would have the seals. Then he hired a developer to come in and put the roads in and the sewer lines and the cable. You want cable, right? Can't live without cable, can you? You cut the cord, you got cable. You can't live without cable. You don't need cable. Fire stick. See, young generation, man. That's why I like it. Okay, then you hire a developer to come in and put the roads in and the utilities. Now you can start building houses. But you have to dedicate, sometimes part of the property is transferred to the public, and the dedication could be for like a park light area on it. You ever see these subdivisions where you pull in and they got like a little gazebo where you can hang out? And they got like a little public area in a subdivision. And you can dedicate property for uses for streets, schools, or parks. Streets, schools, or parks. So a lot of times when they put these subdivision plans in, the township says, I want you to dedicate a little playground here. So for example, there's a plan of lots off of Vernon Drive called Spring Grove Estates. Anybody know where Spring Grove Estates is? Spring Grove Estates, they developed it, and they said this section is going to be for recreation. And they put in a basketball court, and they put in a tennis court, and a little walking trail to walk down to the main road. And then on the other side, they have a little playground, like a jungle gym. So the township said, you can develop that property, but we want you to dedicate some of this property for recreational use, so the kids have somewhere to play. Does that make sense? Okay, good. Then you have builder comes in and builds the houses.
The subdivision, okay, is the person that plans it out, then a subdivider.
No, the subdivider is the person that plans it out.
Oh, okay.
The subdivision is the finalized plan, the drawings that are recorded in the courthouse.
Oh,
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the plaque, the subdivider lays the plaque out, but it's just a drawing right now. Then they take it, get the township and the county approval, and then they record it in the courthouse. Now it's a recorded subdivision.
Okay.
So plat and subdivision.
A plat is just the preliminary drawing. Like, you like to draw, don't you? So sometimes when you draw, don't you draw all the outlines and then you color it in?
What's the difference between plat and subdivision?
Subdivision's been approved by the township. A plat is just a drawing.
That is done by the subdivider.
Like a blueprint.
Yeah, it's the layout. It's the layout. Tough crowd, Andrea, huh?
Yeah.
So when you're going to develop a piece of property like this out on Rathway Road, you have to comply with the municipality's comprehensive plan. So remember we said Ross Draver, comprehensive plan. This section was commercial. This section was parks and recreational. This section was residential houses. This section was agricultural. So if you're going to do it, you have to comply. You have to do it in the residential zoning, unless you apply for a zoning change like Dickey did to carve a little bit of that agricultural off and make it residential.
So Rathaway would be the dedication.
Rathway was the owner of the land.
I think you said basically dedication was like if they have like a basketball or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If Rathway was gonna make this plan, he may dedicate part of this for recreation.
Oh, okay.
Or they could dedicate part for a school, if it was a big enough plan,
Okay.
or a park. And sometimes they may do an environmental impact study. So it's best to like look at like stuff that you know with this kind of stuff or ride by it, and then it'll click. Because Lauren, you knew Spring Brook.
I live,
Okay, so you've seen the park there. So right away, when I said they can dedicate part of the land, because that used to be a farm. And then they came in, they did a plat, laid it all out. In the plat, they said they want to make this part recreation. Then it went to the township. Once the township approved it in the county, what's it called then, Lex? What's the township called? What's the plat called once the township and county approved it?
subdivision.
A subdivision. And then the developer came in, Lauren, and put the roads in. That was Miranda Homes. They put the roads in, and then they built the houses. Builder comes in and does. So, just kind of, I don't know. There may be a question on a test on it. There may not be. And then environmental impact statement may be required because in Spring Grove, there's a big pond. There ain't never no water in it. You know where I'm talking about, that retention pond?
Yeah.
You ever seen those dry ponds?
Yeah, don't you have signs that say watch for the geese?
Yeah, oh yeah, those are my signs I put.
Wow.
My wife feeds those signs, those geese. So I have signs made up, watch out for the geese. You know, a little marketing play on the geese. Andrea ordered those signs for me, didn't you?
Yep.
So they have these dry, now that's an actual pond. But below that pond, there's just a big hole, it looks like. It looks like a pond without water in it. You ever see those? And a lot of times they have a fence around them. Those are stormwater detention. So they had to do an environmental impact study, and they said, well, hell, if you put all these roads in and these houses, isn't that going to create much more runoff? Yeah, because you're going to have cement and roofs versus grass. So they make them put a stormwater detention pond in. So if you get a heavy rain, that dry pond fills up first and then slowly goes into the creek so it doesn't flood the people downstream. Did you ever go down by past my office, the golf course there, and see that creek? When it really rains hard, that creek swells up and gobbles up a lot of that golf course on the bottom there. Anybody ever see that? That's because there's no stormwater detention that water as it comes down from my office in the plaza.
I think you go back on the guy that originally developed that, correct?
No, because he applied by the rules at that time. Different rules.
I got you.
Different rules. Subdivision plans are laid out to lot and blocks. So, we're going to get into legal descriptions. I think that's the next chapter. But on this particular Rathway plan, we'll call it, Lex, this would be lot 56 in the Rathway plan. And then if you go to the courthouse and you look this up, it'll have right here the size of lot 56, 0.27 acres. Remember I said in Ross Draver you need at least a quarter acre for a house? So that particular lot. So my house is in a recorded plan. So the legal description just says lot number, whatever it is, in the Spring Grove lot. And we're going to get into that on the next chapter. There's potential tax burden in a subdivision. So all these people now would have to be reassessed. Because if this was taxed for agricultural, the taxes would be cheap, right? Now that he's subdivided it, these taxes are going to be more expensive. Because there's going to be houses on these lots. And they can charge impact fees because when they go in and do this development, isn't that going to put a bigger burden on the roads? Mm-hmm. Now look at the one paper Andrea passed out to you. Here's Governor Wolf, and he is pitching a tax hike on gas drillers when they were doing all this gas drilling in Washington County. And he wanted to charge him, look what I have highlighted. He wants to collect 5% of what gas producers make from wells, plus 4.7 cents per 1,000 cubic feet that flows as an impact fee. So it's ways for local governments to charge the developers, and in this case, the developers were the oil and gas people, for the more abuse that's going to go on the roads and so forth. Impact fees. You'll remember that, right? Because of the handout, right? Okay, we're almost there, man. We're almost there. There you go. And please, you've probably seen this good-looking guy somewhere on a billboard holding that money up. It's a way for local municipalities to collect money when developers come in and develop properties. Because of the impact the development is going to do on the existing roads. And maybe sewer lines and water. We talked about subdivision density. Restricts the number of houses you can have per acre. In Pennsylvania, the developer, remember, we said the developer is the one responsible for putting the streets in. The developer. He develops the property so that it can be built. And the governing bodies allow impact states. The Interstate Land Sale Full Disclosure Act. You can thank Florida for this. Okay? So when they started putting Disney in Florida, they had all kind of advertisements throughout the country that we're putting a new Disney park in Florida, and we have land 1 mile from Disney. You can buy a lot, Ellen, for as little as $10,000. 1 mile from Disney. And a lot of people did. And a lot of people, when they went down and looked at it, found out it was a swamp.
It's all swamps.
Okay. So they came out with a law, Interstate Land Sale Disclosure Act. The disclosure must be given to buyers, the type of title you're going to get. We'll talk about title a little later. The number of currently homes on site. The availability of recreational facilities, the distance to nearby communities, utility services and charges, and soil condition. So Ellen bought that lot next to 1 mile from Disney for 10 grand that she couldn't use because it was a swamp. But if you would have known that there was no houses currently on the site, there was no recreational facilities on that subdivision, and there's no utilities even there, and the soil conditions were swamp, you'd have never bought it. So this is when you're buying property out of state. Interstate Sales Full Disclosure. Let's talk a little bit about private land use controls. There can be deed restrictions. Restricted covenants. Enforcement in Pennsylvania. So a deed restriction restricts a piece of property on the river. I had 4 lots. I bought them all at the same time. I sold 2 of the lots. on the end and kept the two in the middle. I put a deed restriction in the lots that I sold that they couldn't put a mobile home on the land. Because I wanted to do a house. And I didn't want to have a big house built, be having a mobile home. So I put a deed restriction in those deeds. That's something a private person can put in. You can put a deed restriction in a deed that whoever buys this property can't paint the house blue. That's a private restriction put on something. Now, even though I had those deed restrictions in it, I ended up selling all the property because Lex didn't like the bugs down there on the river. Restricted covenants would be when a subdivision puts the covenants in and restrictions. And remember, we talked about that at Shawnee Point. And Shawnee Point has a covenant that the houses have to be all brick or stone in the front. That would be something the subdivider would put in. So these are all restrictions that could be put on. A private person could put a restriction on. When you sell your property, you can put a restriction on. Then whoever buys this property is not allowed to put an above ground pool in. We're not allowed to paint the house blue or whatever. Or a subdivision could have restrictions. So if you wanted to know at Shawnee Point what the covenants were, you could go to the courthouse and those restricted covenants are recorded in the courthouse. Okay? We talked about condos and planned development, the PUD. The buyer must receive copies of the documents prior to closing. So Spring Grove has condominiums. My mother bought a condominium at Spring Grove. I use my father-in-law as a better example. My father-in-law bought a condominium in Spring Grove too. And before he was able to consummate that sale, they had to give him all the rules and regulations for the condos. And he had so many days, Seneca, to read those rules. Well, one of the rules in there, because apparently he didn't read them, was you couldn't have a dog more than 40 pounds. And he had a big dog. And they were coming after him and saying, hey, you got to get rid of your dog because the rules and regulations here say that you can't have a dog more than 40 pounds, and your dog is clearly more than 40 pounds. Discrimination. No, he had a chance to read those rules and regulations prior to buying the condo, and he apparently didn't read them, and he has to live by those rules. So these condos associations have a lot of rules. They got a rule there that if you pull garbage out, it got to be in a black bag. So my mom's putting white bags out. I said, Mom, you can't put white bags out. The rules and regulations say all the bags got to be black. Looks nice on garbage day. They're all black bags. Okay, any questions? We got through 2 units, man. We got through the first day on a cold day. None of you guys wanted to come today, did you? No.
I did.
Who did? Who said they did?